I'm Sylvia, 32, and 6 months ago, I put my life in Denver on hold to care for my injured brother. I drained my savings, took out loans, cooked, cleaned, everything, just to hold my fractured family together. Then one quiet afternoon, I came home early and heard them laughing. Not just laughing, mocking me. Turns out, my brother was never as broken as he pretended to be, and I was never part of the family, just their ATM with a smile. What I did next changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and thanks for being here. Growing up in Colorado Springs in the 90s, our house on Maple Street looked like something straight out of a family sitcom. White picket fence, 2-car garage, and a front yard where my dad, Robert, would wash his prized Camaro every Sunday after church. He managed sales at Henderson Motors downtown and never let anyone forget that he'd been captain of his high school football team 25 years earlier. My mom, Linda, had been a cheerleader back then, and even at 40, she still did her hair the same way and wore the same shade of pink lipstick she'd worn in her yearbook photo. The Mitchell family hierarchy was established early and never questioned. Jake, 4 years older than me, inherited Dad's athletic genes and Mom's natural charm. By middle school, he was already the star quarterback everyone talked about at the grocery store and the church potluck. Emma, 3 years younger, got Mom's blonde hair and the kind of smile that made strangers stop us in the mall to tell my parents how beautiful their daughter was. She started winning Little Miss Colorado pageants when she was 6, and our living room mantel became a shrine to her crowns and sashes. Then there was me, brown hair like Dad's, but without his easy confidence. Smart like Mom claimed to be, but not in the sparkly, attention-getting way that mattered in our house. I learned early that my role was to make everyone else's shine brighter. When Jake forgot his homework, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to help him finish it before school. When Emma had a pageant, I'd spend hours curling her hair and helping her practice her talent routine. When Mom needed someone to drive to 3 different stores to find the perfect shoes for Emma's dress, guess who got handed the car keys? The pattern became so natural that I didn't even notice it happening. I disappeared into the background so completely that I started to believe that's where I belonged. My junior year, something happened that should have changed everything. I'd been working on an architecture project for months, designing a community center for our school's state competition. I spent every free moment in the art room, perfecting the blueprints and building a scale model that took up half our dining room table. When I won first place at the Colorado State High School Architecture Competition, it was the biggest academic achievement in our family's history. The award ceremony was scheduled for the same night as Jake's playoff game. I remember standing in our kitchen, holding the invitation, trying to find the words to ask if maybe, just this once, they could come see me win something. Dad was polishing his lucky game day shoes, and Mom was ironing Jake's jersey with the focused intensity of a surgeon. When I finally worked up the courage to mention the ceremony, Dad looked up from his shoes and said, "That's great, honey, but you understand Jake needs us there tonight. This could be his ticket to a college scholarship." I drove myself to Denver that night, sat alone in an auditorium full of proud families, and accepted my first-place trophy with a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. The judges talked about my innovative design, my attention to detail, my bright future in architecture. I should have felt proud, but all I felt was hollow. When I got home at midnight, Jake's game was still being replayed on the local news. My trophy went on a shelf in my bedroom, where no one would accidentally notice it. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I started working part-time at Murphy's Hardware downtown, saving every dollar for college. I researched scholarships, filled out applications, and planned my escape from being the Mitchell family's supporting character. When my acceptance letter from University of Colorado Boulder came with a full academic scholarship, I didn't even tell them until 3 days later. Dad's reaction was typical. "Well, I guess that's one less tuition we have to worry about. Now we can focus on getting Jake into a good program." Mom just nodded and went back to planning Emma's Sweet 16 party. Jake was busy with his senior year, and Emma was preparing for the Miss Teen Colorado pageant. Nobody asked about my major, my dorm assignment, or whether I was excited about leaving home. The day I packed my car to drive to Boulder, I realized something that should have broken my heart but instead set me free. They weren't sad to see me go, because they'd never really seen me there in the first place. 10 years later, I was living my best life in Denver. My architecture firm, Mitchell Designs, occupied a converted warehouse in the Rhino district, and I just landed a contract to design a new community center for Arvada. My boyfriend David, an emergency room physician at Presbyterian St. Joseph, had been hinting about engagement rings for months. We'd spend our weekends hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park or exploring the art galleries on Santa Fe Drive. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. That's when my phone rang at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning in March. Mom's number flashed on the screen, and my stomach dropped before I even answered. She never called this early unless something was seriously wrong. Her voice was barely recognizable through the tears. "Sylvia, you have to come home. Jake's been in an accident. A drunk driver hit him head-on last night, and the doctors say he might never walk again without surgery." The words hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I was 16 again, desperate to help my big brother who'd never quite learned how to help himself. I threw clothes into a suitcase and made the 90-minute drive to Colorado Springs in record time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel every time I thought about Jake lying broken in some hospital bed. The Jake I remembered was invincible, the guy who could throw a football 60 yards and charm his way out of any trouble. When I walked into the ICU at Memorial Hospital, I barely recognized the man connected to all those machines. His left leg was elevated in traction, his face was swollen beyond recognition, and Mom was clutching his hand like she could keep him tethered to consciousness through sheer willpower. Dad looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight, his usually perfect hair sticking up at odd angles, and his Henderson Motors polo shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Emma sat in the corner chair, her 2 kids coloring quietly in activity books, while she stared at her phone with the hollow expression of someone whose world had just imploded. Her divorce from Tom had been finalized only 3 months earlier, and she was still figuring out how to be a single mom to 6-year-old Madison and 4-year-old Connor. The surgeon, Dr. Martinez, explained the situation with the kind of clinical detachment that made my chest tight with anxiety. Jake needed immediate spinal surgery to prevent permanent paralysis, but the procedure would cost $180,000, and Jake's construction job didn't provide the kind of insurance that covered experimental treatments. Without the surgery, he'd likely spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. With it, he had an 80% chance of walking again, maybe even returning to normal function. I didn't hesitate. I called my bank from the hospital parking lot and arranged to liquidate my entire savings account, the $150,000 I'd been carefully accumulating for the house David and I planned to buy in Highlands Ranch. When that wasn't enough, I took out a business loan against my firm, putting everything I'd built at risk for a brother who'd barely spoken to me in 2 years. But this was family, and despite everything, Jake was still the boy who'd taught me how to ride a bike and helped me build a treehouse in our backyard oak tree. The decision to temporarily move back to Colorado Springs felt natural in a way that surprised me. David understood, even though it meant putting our relationship on hold while I focused on Jake's recovery. I sublet my Denver apartment, packed up my drafting table, and set up a temporary office in my childhood bedroom. Mom cried when I told her I was staying until Jake was back on his feet, literally and figuratively. "I knew you'd come through for us," she said, squeezing my hand. "You always do." Those first few weeks felt like a gift I'd never expected to receive. Jake was grateful in a way I'd never seen before, thanking me for the smallest things, like adjusting his pillows or bringing him magazines. Emma opened up about her struggles with single motherhood, and I found myself driving Madison to soccer practice and helping Connor with his homework. Mom started including me in her daily phone calls with Aunt Patricia, sharing updates about Jake's progress, like I was a crucial part of the family equation. I redesigned their kitchen while Jake was in rehabilitation, tearing out the old cabinets and installing new countertops as a surprise for his homecoming. Dad actually asked for my opinion on paint colors, something that had never happened in 32 years of being his daughter. When Emma's lawyer needed $5,000 for custody proceedings, I wrote the check without thinking twice. When Mom's car needed new tires, I handled it. When Dad's blood pressure medication wasn't covered by his insurance, I made sure he got what he needed. For 6 months, I poured everything I had into rebuilding not just Jake's life, but our family's foundation. I cooked dinner every Sunday, hosted Madison's birthday party in Mom and Dad's backyard, and listened to Emma's dating disasters with the patience of a saint. David visited when he could, but I could see the concern in his eyes as I pushed our plans further and further into the future. Just until Jake's walking again, I promised him. Just until things get back to normal. I should have known that normal in the Mitchell family had never included me as anything more than the reliable backup plan. I should have recognized the signs when conversations stopped abruptly whenever I entered a room, or when Emma started getting mysterious phone calls that she'd take outside on the porch. I should have questioned why Jake's recovery seemed to stall whenever the physical therapist mentioned him returning to work, or why Mom's grocery list suddenly included expensive items we'd never bought before. But I was so desperate to finally belong, to finally be seen as essential rather than optional, that I ignored every red flag waving right in front of my face. 6 months into what I thought was Jake's recovery, I came home early from King's Supers with groceries for the week. I'd been making Jake's favorite lasagna every Tuesday, and I wanted to surprise him by starting it earlier than usual. The house seemed unusually quiet when I pulled into the driveway, which was strange because Jake's physical therapy session had been canceled that morning. I juggled the grocery bags and fumbled with my keys, already mentally planning how I'd layer the noodles and ricotta cheese the way he liked it. The sound of laughter stopped me cold before I even reached the kitchen. Not just any laughter, but Jake's deep, genuine belly laugh that I hadn't heard since before the accident. I set the groceries down quietly on the front hall table and followed the sound toward the living room, my heart suddenly pounding with a mixture of hope and confusion. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was finally turning the corner. Maybe all those months of sacrifice were about to pay off with real progress. What I saw through the doorway made my knees buckle. Jake was standing at the window, perfectly balanced on both legs, tossing a foam football back and forth with Connor, while Madison sat cross-legged on the carpet, giggling at something Emma had whispered in her ear. No wheelchair in sight, no walker, no sign of the man who'd claimed just yesterday that standing for more than 5 minutes made his back spasm uncontrollably. "God, I'm so sick of pretending to be helpless," Jake said, catching the football with an easy motion that spoke of months of hidden practice. "Sylvia's been driving me crazy, hovering over me like I'm made of glass. At least when she goes back to Denver next month, I can stop acting like an invalid." Emma curled up in Dad's recliner, painting her nails a bright pink that reminded me of our childhood pageant days. "Honestly, I don't know how you've kept it up this long. I would have cracked weeks ago." Mom appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of sandwiches, moving with the kind of casual energy that suggested this was just another normal afternoon in the Mitchell household. "Jake's always been a good actor. Remember when he convinced Mrs. Henderson he had mono to get out of that history final?" They all laughed like they were sharing the most innocent family memory, not discussing the elaborate deception that had cost me everything I'd worked for. "The best part," Dad said from his spot on the couch, "is that Sylvia actually believes she's helping. She redesigned the whole kitchen thinking it would make Jake's recovery easier. Poor kid has no clue we've been planning Emma's surprise birthday party without her for weeks." Emma's face lit up with the kind of excitement I remembered from her pageant days. "I still can't believe she doesn't suspect anything. We've been texting about it right in front of her." The room spun around me as the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The mysterious phone calls Emma took outside. The conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. Jake's convenient setbacks whenever his doctor mentioned returning to work. The way Mom had been cooking elaborate meals while claiming she was too tired to help with grocery shopping. They weren't just hiding Jake's recovery from me. They were actively planning a life that didn't include me while using my money to fund it. "Speaking of which," Mom continued, settling into her favorite spot on the sofa, "we need to figure out what to do about Sylvia after the party. She's been talking about staying through Christmas, and honestly, I think we all need some space to get back to normal." Jake nodded, stretching his supposedly injured back with the fluid motion of someone who'd never been hurt at all. "I'll handle it. I'll tell her the doctor thinks I need to learn independence or some crap like that." Emma held up her newly painted nails to catch the light streaming through the window. "It's going to be so nice to have family time without walking on eggshells. Sylvia's always so intense about everything, like she's keeping score of who's grateful enough." The casual cruelty in her voice hit me harder than any physical blow could have. This was my baby sister, the girl I'd braided hair for and driven to countless auditions, talking about me like I was some kind of burden they'd been forced to endure. Plus, Dad added with the kind of practical tone he used when discussing car sales. Once she's back in Denver, we won't have to worry about her seeing the bank statements. That business loan she took out has been a lifesaver. Emma's lawyer fees, Jake's new truck payment, your mother's spa weekend with Patricia. We've been living better than we have in years. Mom giggled like a teenager sharing secrets at a sleepover. Sylvia always was the responsible one. She'd probably have a heart attack if she knew we spent her surgery money on anything fun. I backed away from the doorway on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. My hand pressed against my mouth to keep from making a sound that would give me away. The grocery bag sat forgotten in the hallway as I grabbed my purse and car keys, my vision blurring with tears that felt like they might never stop coming. I made it to my car before the first sob escaped. A raw sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my chest. Sitting in the driveway of my childhood home, watching my family continue their performance through the living room window, I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding for 32 years. I wasn't the family's safety net. I wasn't their reliable foundation. I was their mark, the person they turned to when they needed something, then forgot about until the next crisis required funding. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "How's Jake doing today? Any progress?" I stared at the message through tears, realizing that I'd spent 6 months lying to the man I loved about a situation I didn't even understand myself. Jake wasn't recovering. He'd already recovered, and I'd been too desperate to finally matter to my family to see what was right in front of me. I drove straight to the Hampton Inn on South Nevada Avenue and checked into a room, ignoring the confused look from the desk clerk when I gave a local address, but insisted I needed a place to stay. For 3 days, I sat on that generic hotel bedspread, alternating between crying until my eyes swelled shut and staring at the ceiling while my mind raced through every interaction I'd had with my family over the past 6 months. Every grateful smile from Jake, every tearful thank you from Mom, every sisterly bonding moment with Emma. All of it had been performance, and I'd been the only one who didn't know I was watching a show. On the 4th day, something shifted inside me like a switch, flipping from grief to something sharper, more focused. I opened my laptop and started documenting everything, creating spreadsheets that would make my accounting professor proud. Column 1. Every dollar I'd spent on Jake's medical bills, totaling $180,000 between the surgery, rehabilitation, and ongoing care. Column 2. Household expenses I'd covered while living at home, from groceries to utility bills to Mom's emergency dental work. Another $15,000. Column 3. Emma's expenses, including her divorce lawyer, car repairs, and the kids' school supplies, adding up to $8,000. The grand total made my stomach clench, $203,000 in 6 months. But the money, devastating as it wasn't the worst part. I started a different kind of list, documenting every lie they'd told me, every moment of fake gratitude, every conversation I'd overheard that revealed their true feelings. Jake complaining about my hovering while I literally carried him to bathroom appointments. Emma rolling her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking as I helped Madison with homework. Dad joking with his poker buddies about having a live-in maid without rent expenses. Mom telling Aunt Patricia that I was finally being useful for once during one of their weekly phone calls. By the end of the week, I'd made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to slink back to Denver with my tail between my legs, letting them think they'd successfully used and discarded me. I wasn't going to confront them with tears and accusations that they'd brush off as me being overly dramatic again. I was going to give them exactly what they'd given me, a performance so convincing they'd never see it coming. The plan started forming while I sat in Village Inn at 2 a.m, drinking coffee and watching the drunk college kids stumble past the windows. They wanted me gone after Emma's surprise party. Perfect. I'd give them a farewell party they'd never forget. One that would finally show our entire extended family and their circle of friends exactly who the Mitchell family really was. But first, I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I moved back into the house on Maple Street the next Monday morning, carrying fresh groceries and wearing the same patient smile I'd perfected over the past 6 months. "Sorry I disappeared for a few days," I told Mom as she sat at the kitchen table, still in her bathrobe at 11 a.m. "I just needed some time to process how well Jake is doing. I think I was having trouble letting go of my caretaker role." She practically glowed with relief, probably thinking she'd successfully manipulated me back into line. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect daughter and sister while secretly gathering ammunition. I started leaving my phone recording in my purse whenever I left rooms, catching conversations about their real plans for the money I'd provided. Jake talking to his friend Marcus about the new Silverado he'd bought with my loan. Emma laughing with her girlfriend about how easy it was to get me to pay for Madison's expensive summer camp. Mom and Dad discussing their upcoming cruise to Alaska, funded by what they called my contribution to family expenses. The evidence was even more damning than I'd expected. Jake had been walking normally for over 2 months, but he'd perfected the art of limping and wincing whenever I was around. Emma had been planning her birthday party since April, specifically choosing the weekend I'd mentioned wanting to visit David in Denver. They'd opened a separate family group chat called Mitchell Inner Circle that included everyone except me, sharing jokes about my gullibility and coordinating their lies about Jake's condition. But the most crushing discovery came when I found Dad's computer open to his bank statements. They hadn't just been living off my money, they'd been living better because of it. Mom's weekly spa appointments, Jake's expensive physical therapy equipment that he didn't need, Emma's shopping sprees at the town center while I watched her kids for free. They'd treated my sacrifice like winning the lottery, and I'd been too desperate for their approval to see it. The farewell party idea crystallized into something beautiful and terrible. I called Mom one evening in late August, sitting on the back porch where Jake and I used to catch fireflies as kids. "I've been thinking about moving back to Denver permanently," I said, watching her face light up through the kitchen window. "But before I go, I'd love to host a party here. Something to celebrate Jake's recovery and Emma's new chapter, and to thank everyone who supported us through this difficult time." Mom practically bounced in her chair with excitement. "Oh, Sylvia, that's such a wonderful idea. We could invite everyone, the whole family, the church congregation, Jake's friends from high school. It would be like a celebration of how strong the Mitchell family is." The irony was so thick I almost choked on it, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Exactly. I want everyone to see how we come together in times of crisis. I'll handle all the planning and expenses, of course. It's the least I can do after everything you've all given me." The next month was a masterclass in event planning fueled by righteous anger. I contacted every person who'd ever mattered to the Mitchell family: Dad's co-workers from the dealership, Mom's church committee friends, Jake's old football teammates, Emma's sorority sisters, our cousins from Denver and Pueblo, even our elderly neighbors who'd known us since we were kids. I told them all the same story. We were celebrating Jake's miraculous recovery, and I wanted to surprise the family with a testament to how much everyone cared about them. I hired Rebecca Martinez, a professional videographer I'd worked with on architecture projects, to create what I described as a family documentary about our journey through Jake's accident and recovery. I gave her access to hundreds of photos from the past 6 months, along with what I claimed were candid audio recordings of our family's private moments. She had no idea she was helping me create the most devastating exposé of fraud and manipulation that Colorado Springs had ever seen. The catering came from Jake's favorite barbecue place on Tejon Street. Enough food for 80 people, costing me another $3,000 I'd borrowed against my business credit line. I rented tables and chairs, hired a photographer to document the event, and even arranged for a local news reporter to attend what I'd described as a heartwarming story of family resilience and community support. Everything had to be perfect, because this would be my final performance as the Mitchell family's devoted daughter and sister. But the most important part of my plan wasn't the party itself. It was the gifts I'd prepared for each family member, carefully chosen to represent exactly what they'd taken from me and what they'd given in return. For Jake, I'd commissioned a custom trophy from a local shop, engraved with Colorado Springs' greatest actor for outstanding performance in a dramatic role. For Emma, I created a photo album titled The Real Cost of Independence, filled with receipts for every expense I'd covered, organized by date and category. For Mom and Dad, I'd prepared a beautifully bound financial portfolio showing exactly how much money they'd spent of mine, compared to their contributions to my college education, my career, or any significant moment in my life. The hardest part was maintaining the act for those final weeks, continuing to cook dinner and do laundry and listen to their complaints, while knowing exactly what they thought of me behind my back. But every fake smile from Jake, every manipulative tear from Emma, every condescending pat on the head from Mom just added fuel to the fire burning in my chest. They'd turned me into their personal ATM for 6 months. Now I was going to show them the real cost of their transaction. 3 days before the party, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal and my detailed plans for justice. David had been calling twice a day, worried about my increasingly distant behavior, but I couldn't explain what I was planning without risking everything. He'd try to talk me out of it, or worse, he'd think I was as petty and vindictive as they'd always claimed I was. This was something I had to do alone, for the girl who'd driven herself to accept that architecture award, for the woman who'd sacrificed her dreams to save a family that had never truly wanted to be saved. The morning of the party, I woke up before dawn and stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the street where I'd learned to ride a bike and sold Girl Scout cookies, and dreamed of becoming someone important enough for my family to notice. In a few hours, 60 people would gather in our backyard to witness the most honest conversation the Mitchell family had ever had. And for the first time in my life, I was going to be the one controlling the narrative. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of perfect Colorado weather that made postcards jealous. 75 degrees, cloudless blue sky, and just enough breeze to keep the barbecue smoke from lingering over the backyard. I'd been up since 5 a.m., arranging rental tables and setting up the sound system, transforming our modest backyard into something that looked like a family reunion from a Norman Rockwell painting. The white tablecloths fluttered gently in the breeze, and the red, white, and blue balloons I'd tied to every chair back gave the whole scene an almost patriotic feel that seemed perfect for what I was about to do. By 3 o'clock, nearly 70 people had gathered on our back patio and spilling onto the lawn. Everyone from Grandma Mitchell in her wheelchair to Jake's old football coach, to the Hendersons from next door who'd watched us grow up. Mom floated through the crowd in her best floral dress, accepting compliments about what a wonderful daughter she'd raised and how blessed the family was to have such a devoted caretaker. Jake held court near the barbecue pit, walking normally but still mentioning his ongoing recovery to anyone who'd listen, milking sympathy from his former teammates about how hard it was to accept his limitations. Emma had brought Madison and Connor, both dressed in their Sunday best and playing perfectly behaved grandchildren for the cameras. She kept glancing at me with this mixture of gratitude and slight nervousness, probably wondering if I suspected anything about the surprise birthday celebration she thought was coming. Dad worked the crowd like the natural salesman he'd always been, shaking hands and slapping backs, telling anyone who'd listen about how proud he was of his family's strength during their time of crisis. I waited until everyone had eaten their fill of barbecue and potato salad before tapping a fork against my wine glass to get their attention. "Thank you all so much for being here today," I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet backyard with the kind of confidence I'd learned in boardroom presentations. "It means the world to our family to have so much love and support surrounding us. Before we continue with the celebration, I've put together a little video documentary about our journey over these past 6 months. I think you'll find it very enlightening." Rebecca had done beautiful work with the footage, opening with happy family photos from our childhood and transitioning into the dramatic story of Jake's accident. The first 10 minutes played exactly as everyone expected. Hospital scenes, insurance struggles, my emotional decision to put my life on hold to care for my brother. I watched Mom dab at her eyes with a tissue while Aunt Patricia squeezed her shoulder supportively. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair, probably wondering why I was drawing so much attention to his supposed disability when he was trying to appear recovered. Then the tone shifted. The video began playing audio recordings I'd secretly made over the past month, starting with Jake's voice clearly stating, "Thank God Sylvia doesn't know I've been walking fine for months now." The crowd fell completely silent except for someone's sharp intake of breath. Mom's face went pale as her own voice filled the speakers. Sylvia's always been the easiest one to manipulate. She's so desperate for approval that she'll empty her bank account if you play victim long enough. Emma's horrified gasp was audible even over the sound system as the recordings continued, revealing conversation after conversation about their deception. Dad discussing their Alaska cruise plans, funded by my contribution. Emma laughing about getting me to pay for Madison's summer camp while she bought herself a new wardrobe. Jake bragging to his friends about his new truck purchase, using money I thought had gone to medical bills. The audio was crystal clear, undeniably their voices, impossible to dismiss or explain away. The video concluded with recent footage Rebecca had shot without their knowledge, showing Jake walking perfectly normally, playing football with Connor in the backyard, lifting heavy boxes while helping Emma move furniture. The final shot was a close-up of Jake's face as he told someone off-camera, "I'm so sick of pretending to be crippled. Sylvia's hovering is driving me insane, but at least she's finally useful for something." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on the entire gathering. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the backyard focused on me with a mixture of shock, sympathy, and growing anger directed at my family. "Since we're celebrating honesty today," I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was hammering against my ribs, "I thought you should all know the real story. Over the past 6 months, I've provided $203,000 to support what I believed was Jake's recovery and our family's crisis. This money came from my life savings, my business assets, and loans I took against my architectural firm." The numbers hit the crowd like physical blows, with several people turning to stare at my parents with expressions of disbelief and disgust. Uncle Mike, Dad's older brother, stood up from his chair near the back, his face flushed with the kind of anger I'd never seen from him before. "Robert, please tell me this isn't true," he said, his voice carrying across the silent backyard like a judge delivering a verdict. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came out, his usual smooth sales pitch apparently failing him when it mattered most. "It gets better," I continued, pulling out the beautifully wrapped gifts I'd prepared for each family member. "Jake, this is for you." I handed him the custom trophy, watching his face crumble as he read the engraving aloud in a voice barely above a whisper. "Colorado Springs' greatest actor for outstanding performance in a dramatic role." Several of his former teammates started murmuring among themselves, the kind of harsh whispers that would follow him for years in this town. Emma's gift was next, the photo album filled with receipts and bank statements, showing every dollar I'd spent on her legal fees, car repairs, and children's expenses. "Emma, since you're so interested in independence, I thought you might like to see exactly what your freedom cost," I said, watching her flip through pages of documentation with shaking hands. Madison looked up at her mother with confusion, probably wondering why all the adults suddenly seemed so angry and sad. The final gifts went to Mom and Dad, matching portfolios showing their complete financial dependence on my contributions, compared to what they'd ever invested in my success or happiness. "These show the real math of our family relationship," I explained to the crowd, many of whom were now openly staring at my parents with expressions of disgust. Every dollar I gave them, compared to every dollar they spent on my education, my career, or supporting my dreams. "I think you'll find the ratio quite illuminating." Mrs. Henderson from next door was the first to speak, her elderly voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Linda Mitchell, I've known you for 20 years, and I am absolutely appalled. That girl sacrificed her entire life to help you, and this is how you repay her?" Other voices joined in, a chorus of family friends and extended relatives expressing their shock and disappointment at what they'd witnessed. Jake tried to defend himself, stammering something about the recovery being more psychological than physical. But Coach Peterson shut him down with a look of pure disgust. "Son, I taught you better than this. There's no excuse for what you've done to your sister." Emma burst into tears, whether from shame or from finally being caught. But even her children seemed to sense that something terrible had happened, and moved closer to me instead of comforting their mother. As the crowd began to disperse, many people stopping to squeeze my hand or whisper words of support, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. This wasn't revenge in the cruel, destructive sense. This was justice. This was truth. This was finally showing the world who the Mitchell family really was behind their perfect suburban facade. I packed my car while the catering crew cleaned up the backyard, loading my few remaining possessions with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. David was driving down from Denver to help with the move, and by tomorrow night, I'd be back in my real life, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. The immediate aftermath of what Colorado Springs would later call the Mitchell family meltdown hit them like a freight train carrying social destruction and financial reality in equal measure. Within 24 hours of the party, the story had spread through their social circles faster than wildfire in August drought conditions. Mom's book club expelled her via group text, with President Janet Morrison writing, "We cannot associate with someone who would exploit their own daughter's generosity so callously." Dad's poker night disbanded permanently when Uncle Mike announced he was too disgusted to sit at the same table as a man who raised a con artist and then became one himself. Jake discovered the true cost of small-town reputation when he showed up for his part-time coaching position at Pine Creek High School on Monday morning. Principal Anderson met him in the parking lot, his face grim with the kind of expression reserved for delivering bad news about budget cuts or student accidents. "Jake, I'm sorry, but we've received several calls from parents concerned about having someone coach their children who would lie about a disability for financial gain. I'm going to have to let you go, effective immediately." The dismissal stung worse than any football injury he'd ever sustained, especially when he realized that half the parents calling had been at the party, watching his deception unravel in real time. Emma's world crumbled even faster than her brother's, starting with an emergency call from her divorce attorney on Tuesday afternoon. "Emma, I need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding the source of your legal fees," Martha Stevens said, her professional tone carrying an edge of barely contained disapproval. "If these payments came from fraudulent activities, it could seriously impact your custody case. Judge Martinez has already heard about the incident through his wife, who apparently attended your family gathering this weekend." The social isolation hit Mom the hardest because her entire identity had been built around maintaining the perfect family image within their church and community circles. Pastor Williams called her into his office Wednesday morning, not to offer comfort or counseling, but to suggest she might want to consider finding a new congregation until the scandal died down. "Linda, I've had 12 families approach me about this situation," he said, removing his glasses to clean them with the nervous gesture she'd seen him use during difficult sermons. "They feel betrayed not just by what you did to Sylvia, but by the fact that you accepted their prayers and casseroles during Jake's supposed recovery while knowing it was all fabricated." By the end of the first week, the financial reality began hitting as hard as the social consequences. Without my monthly contributions, they couldn't afford the mortgage payment on their overextended household budget. Dad's car dealership commission had been decent but inconsistent, and Mom's part-time work at the library barely covered grocery costs. The credit cards they'd been using to supplement their lifestyle, assuming my support would continue indefinitely, suddenly became monthly burdens they couldn't manage. Jake's new truck, purchased with money I'd intended for his medical recovery, became the first casualty of their financial awakening. The repo man showed up on a Thursday morning while Jake was frantically applying for jobs online, his college degree in communications proving worthless when every employer in Colorado Springs had heard about his elaborate deception. "Man, this is embarrassing," the tow truck driver said, hooking up the Silverado while neighbors watched from their windows. "I heard about what you did to your sister. That's just wrong." Emma's situation deteriorated rapidly when she realized that without my financial safety net, she couldn't afford both rent and childcare while working full-time. Her ex-husband Tom, emboldened by the custody lawyer's concerns about her fraudulent activities, filed for primary custody of Madison and Connor. "You can't even support yourself without scamming your sister," he said, during their heated phone conversation that the kids overheard from their bedrooms. "What makes you think you can properly care for our children?" The extended family's reaction provided no refuge from the mounting consequences. Aunt Patricia, who'd always been Mom's closest confidant, refused to take her calls after watching the party video that someone had posted on Facebook. Cousin Jennifer wrote a scathing letter that arrived Saturday morning, her teacher's handwriting precise with rage. "I cannot believe you would manipulate Sylvia's love for family to fund your selfish lifestyle. She was always the best of all of us, and you've proven you never deserved her." Dad's pride took the biggest hit when Uncle Mike confronted him at the grocery store on Saturday afternoon, their argument loud enough that other shoppers stopped to stare. "Robert, that girl gave up everything for you, and you treated her like a personal bank account," Mike said, his voice carrying across the produce section with decades of suppressed frustration. "I always wondered why Sylvia never came around much after college. Now I know it's because she was smart enough to see through your bullshit before the rest of us did." By the second week, Jake had been forced to take a job at AutoZone for $12 an hour, a humbling experience for someone who'd spent his 20s assuming his charm and athletic history would carry him through life without real effort. His coworkers, mostly recent high school graduates, treated him with the polite distance reserved for people whose reputations preceded them in the worst possible way. "Aren't you the guy who faked being disabled?" asked Tyler, a 19-year-old kid working his way through community college. "Dude, that's seriously messed up." Emma's descent was even more dramatic. Moving from her comfortable 2-bedroom apartment to a studio in the rougher part of town when she couldn't make rent without my contributions. Madison and Connor, confused by the sudden changes and their mother's constant stress, started acting out at school and asking questions Emma couldn't answer honestly. "Why can't Aunt Sylvia help us anymore?" Madison asked one evening, while Emma tried to stretch a box of mac and cheese into dinner for 3 people. "She always helped us before." The breaking point came during their 3rd week of consequences, when Mom suffered what appeared to be a mild heart episode, brought on by the stress of social isolation and financial panic. Dad rushed her to Memorial Hospital, the same place where Jake had recovered from his real injuries 8 months earlier, creating a bitter irony that wasn't lost on any of them. Dr. Martinez, the same physician who'd treated Jake, recognized them immediately and couldn't hide his disapproval. "Mrs. Mitchell, your stress levels are dangerously high, but I have to ask, can you afford the treatment you need, or should I contact Sylvia about covering your medical expenses too?" That night, sitting in the hospital waiting room while Mom underwent tests, the 3 of them finally had the honest conversation they should have had months earlier. Jake stared at his hands, still bearing the calluses from his new job, and broke the silence that had been growing heavier by the day. "I keep thinking about what Coach Peterson said at the party. He was right. Sylvia taught me better than this. She taught all of us better than this, and we threw it back in her face." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper when she added, "The kids ask about her every day. They don't understand why she's gone, and I don't know how to explain that it's because their mother is a terrible person who took advantage of the one family member who actually cared about us." Her tears fell onto the hospital floor tiles, each drop carrying the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone and relationships that might never be repaired. Dad looked older than his 62 years, his hair grayer and his shoulders stooped with the burden of recognition that was long overdue. "I spent 30 years telling myself that Sylvia was just naturally responsible, that she didn't need the same attention and support we gave Jake and Emma. But the truth is, we trained her to take care of us and then resented her for being better at life than we were." As Mom's test results came back normal, her episode had been anxiety-related rather than cardiac. They realized they were facing a choice that would define the rest of their relationships with each other and with the daughter and sister they'd driven away. They could continue making excuses, blaming circumstances, and hoping the scandal would blow over while learning nothing from their mistakes. Or they could finally grow up and become the people Sylvia had always believed they could be, even when they'd proven her wrong over and over again. The 4th week brought an unexpected grace period when Grandma Mitchell, Dad's 87-year-old mother, called from her assisted living facility in Denver. "Robert, I saw the video online," she said in the no-nonsense voice that had kept the Mitchell family in line for decades. "That granddaughter of mine is worth 10 of the rest of you combined. And if you don't find a way to make this right, you'll answer to me." Her offer to help with 1 month's mortgage payment came with strict conditions. They had to get jobs, all of them. And they had to start paying their own way, like adults. Jake threw himself into his AutoZone work with a dedication that surprised everyone, including himself. He started taking evening classes in automotive repair at Pikes Peak Community College, using his employee discount to learn skills that might actually lead to a stable career. Emma found full-time work at a dental office, swallowing her pride to accept a receptionist position that paid enough to keep her small apartment and maintain joint custody of her children. Mom and Dad made the hardest adjustment, selling their house on Maple Street and moving to a modest apartment near downtown Colorado Springs. Dad took a job selling insurance, using his people skills in a way that didn't depend on maintaining an impossible image of perfection. Mom found purpose working at a nonprofit organization that helped families navigate medical crises. Her own experience with financial desperation, giving her genuine empathy for their clients' struggles. The changes were slow and painful, like physical therapy after a serious injury, but they were real. For the first time in their lives, they were learning to stand on their own feet instead of leaning on someone else for support. And in the quiet moments between work shifts and bill payments, they began to understand what Sylvia had been trying to teach them all along. That real family isn't about what you can take from each other, but what you're willing to give when it truly matters. 6 months after the party that changed everything, something remarkable began happening in Colorado Springs. Jake had been promoted to assistant manager at AutoZone, his dedication and mechanical knowledge earning respect from customers, who remembered him as the former high school quarterback, rather than the man who'd faked a disability. He'd completed his automotive repair certification with a 3.8 GPA, proving to himself that he was capable of more than charm and athletic ability when he actually applied himself to something meaningful. The real transformation showed in small moments that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. When his coworker Tyler mentioned struggling with his college tuition payments, Jake quietly arranged for him to get extra hours and taught him advanced diagnostic skills that would make him more valuable as an employee. "Man, you didn't have to do that," Tyler said one afternoon while they restocked inventory together. Jake shrugged, adjusting a display of motor oil with the careful attention to detail he'd never shown for anything in his previous 36 years. "Someone taught me that family helps family, but real family doesn't keep score." Emma's journey proved even more dramatic, as single motherhood and financial independence forced her to discover strengths she'd never known she possessed. Working full-time at Dr. Morrison's dental practice while taking evening business classes pushed her to her limits. But for the first time in her life, she felt proud of what she was accomplishing rather than ashamed of what she was taking from others. Madison and Connor noticed the change immediately, telling their friends at school that their mom was the hardest working person in the whole world. The custody arrangement with Tom had stabilized into something healthier than their marriage had ever been, partly because Emma was no longer the desperate, financially dependent woman he'd divorced. When Connor broke his arm at soccer practice, Emma handled the emergency room visit and insurance paperwork without calling anyone for help, a moment of competence that surprised them both. "You've really got your life together," Tom said, as they waited for Connor's X-ray results. "The kids are lucky to have you as their mom." The compliment meant more to Emma than any pageant crown she'd ever won. Mom and Dad's adjustment required the most fundamental rewiring of personalities that had been set in stone for decades. Living in their modest 2-bedroom apartment near downtown, they had to learn skills they'd avoided their entire marriage: budgeting, meal planning, and most importantly, communicating honestly about their fears and expectations, instead of using their children as emotional buffers. Dad's insurance job forced him to help families navigate genuine crises, giving him perspective on the difference between real emergencies and manufactured drama. Mom's work at the Family Crisis Center became more than just employment. It became a form of penance that gradually transformed into genuine purpose, helping other families manage medical bills and insurance complications. She saw her own behavior reflected in the clients who tried to manipulate their relatives into providing financial support. "Mrs. Mitchell," said her supervisor during her 3-month review, "you have an unusual ability to spot when someone is trying to take advantage of their family's generosity. It's like you can see right through their excuses." The most significant change wasn't in their individual circumstances, but in how they related to each other as a family unit that no longer revolved around crisis and manipulation. Sunday dinners became actual conversations about work achievements and personal goals, rather than elaborate performances designed to extract sympathy or money from each other. Jake talked about his plans to open his own auto repair shop within 5 years. Emma shared her dreams of eventually becoming a dental hygienist once she finished her business degree. Mom and Dad learned to celebrate these accomplishments without trying to take credit for their children's success or immediately figuring out how to benefit from their progress. When Emma received a promotion to office manager at the dental practice, Mom's first reaction was genuine pride, rather than calculating how much more money Emma might now be able to contribute to family expenses. When Jake completed his certification program, Dad attended the graduation ceremony not because he felt obligated, but because he was actually interested in his son's achievements. The extended family slowly began accepting them back into fold, but the relationships were fundamentally different now. based on mutual respect rather than the old dynamics of enablement and dependency. Uncle Mike invited Dad to rejoin the poker game after 8 months of exile, but the conversation stayed focused on cards and sports rather than complaints about money or requests for loans. Aunt Patricia started calling Mom again, but their conversations centered on their volunteer work and grandchildren rather than gossip and family drama. Most importantly, they stopped talking about me as if I owed them something, or as if my absence was a punishment I was inflicting on them for minor misunderstandings. Jake deleted my phone number from his contacts, not out of anger, but out of respect for the boundaries I'd established. Emma stopped driving past my old apartment in Denver when she visited friends there, recognizing that some relationships require space to heal, if they can heal at all. The real test of their transformation came when Grandma Mitchell had a minor stroke in December, requiring temporary assistance with her care and finances. Instead of immediately calling me or assuming I'd step in to handle the crisis, they developed a plan among themselves. Jake arranged time off work to help with her physical care. Emma managed the insurance paperwork, and Mom and Dad coordinated with the assisted living facility to ensure proper treatment. When Grandma asked about me during one of their visits, Dad answered honestly rather than making excuses or playing victim. "Sylvia's doing well in Denver, Grandma. She needed space from us, and we're learning to respect that. We're taking care of you ourselves this time." Grandma nodded approvingly, her sharp eyes still seeing through pretense despite her medical challenges. "It's about time you all grew up and started acting like the adults she always treated you as." By the end of their first year of genuine independence, they had become people I might have been proud to call family. Not because they were perfect, but because they were finally honest about their imperfections and willing to do the hard work of changing them. 18 months after the party that ended one chapter of my life and began another, I stood in the conference room of my expanded Denver architecture firm, looking out at the city skyline while my team presented our latest project to potential clients. Mitchell Designs had grown from a struggling solo practice to a 15-person firm specializing in community centers and affordable housing developments. The irony wasn't lost on me that my greatest professional success had come from learning to build healthy boundaries in my personal life. David and I had married the previous spring in a small ceremony at the Denver Botanic Gardens, surrounded by friends who valued us for who we were rather than what we could provide. Our honeymoon in Italy had been funded entirely by money I'd earned through my own work, a freedom that felt more luxurious than any 5-star hotel could have provided. We'd bought a house in the Highlands neighborhood, complete with a studio space where I could work on personal architectural projects, without the pressure of supporting anyone else's dreams or emergencies. The success felt different from anything I'd achieved before because it was truly mine, not compromised by family obligations or diluted by guilt about prioritizing my own goals. When the Colorado Architecture Institute asked me to speak at their annual conference about building sustainable practice in unstable times, I knew the real subject of my presentation wasn't about construction materials or project management, but about learning to construct a life that could withstand the storms that other people's problems could create. My phone had been silent from Colorado Springs for over a year, which felt like both a loss and a gift. Through mutual friends and occasional social media glimpses, I learned that my family was not only surviving, but actually thriving in ways that would have seemed impossible when they were dependent on my financial support. Jake had indeed opened his own auto repair shop, a modest operation that was earning steady profits through honest work and fair pricing. Emma had completed her business degree and was managing the dental practice, where she'd started as a receptionist, her children thriving in the stability she'd created through her own efforts. Mom and Dad had found a rhythm in their smaller life that seemed to suit them better than the constant stress of maintaining appearances they couldn't afford. Their Christmas card, forwarded by Aunt Patricia, showed them volunteering at a community dinner rather than posing in expensive outfits in front of an over-leveraged house. They looked older but somehow more genuine, like people who'd finally stopped performing roles that had never really fit them anyway. The real measure of my healing came not from their success, but from my ability to feel genuinely happy about their progress, without feeling obligated to contribute to it or take credit for inspiring it. They had learned to stand on their own not because I'd taught them how, but because I'd finally stopped preventing them from discovering their own strength. The distinction mattered more than I'd realized it would. In February, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through my business address, written in Emma's careful handwriting on simple stationery, that bore no resemblance to the elaborate thank you cards she'd sent during her pageant years. "Sylvia," it began, "I don't expect a response to this letter, and I'm not writing to ask for anything except maybe forgiveness that I know I don't deserve. I wanted you to know that Madison is 8 now, and when she talks about what she wants to be when she grows up, she always says, independent like Aunt Sylvia. I realize now that the greatest gift you ever gave us wasn't your money or your time or your sacrifice. It was showing us what it looked like to have self-respect and boundaries. I'm trying to teach that to my children now, and I think of you every time I tell them that love doesn't mean giving up everything for other people." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing not their struggles or their successes, but their understanding of what they'd done wrong and their commitment to never repeating those patterns with their own children or each other. Emma wrote about teaching Madison and Connor to save their allowance money and to solve their own problems before asking for help. She described Jake's insistence on paying market rate when Dad needed car repairs, and Mom's refusal to accept money from her children even when her own budget was tight. "We know we can't undo the damage we did to your trust and your finances," the letter concluded. "But we want you to know that we're trying to become people who would deserve a sister like you, even if we never get the chance to prove it." The signature was simply Emma, with no requests for contact or suggestions for reconciliation, just an acknowledgement of responsibility that had taken her 30 years to develop. I read the letter 3 times before filing it in my desk drawer, not because I was planning to respond, but because it represented something I'd waited my entire life to receive. Genuine accountability from my family members who'd finally grown up enough to understand the difference between explanation and excuse. Whether that growth would ever translate into a relationship we could both trust remained an open question, one I no longer felt pressured to answer quickly or definitively. David found me in my home office that evening, staring out the window at the city lights that had become more familiar and comforting than the streets of Colorado Springs had ever been. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the easy comfort of someone who'd learned to give me space to process complicated emotions without trying to fix them for me. "I was thinking about how strange it is that the best thing I ever did for my family was stopping trying to help them," I said, turning away from the window to look at the man who'd supported my decision to prioritize my own well-being, even when it looked selfish from the outside. "And how the best thing I ever did for myself was learning that love doesn't require self-sacrifice to be real." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both understanding that some revelations don't need immediate discussion or analysis. They just need space to exist and be acknowledged. The woman who'd driven herself to that architecture award ceremony at 16 would have been amazed to discover that the life she'd dreamed of was possible, but only after she'd stopped trying to earn it through endless giving, to people who'd never learned to receive it with gratitude. The next morning, I started working on a new project, not a building this time, but a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping young adults establish healthy financial boundaries with family members who'd learned to see love as a transaction. If my story could prevent even one person from spending decades as their family's personal ATM, then perhaps all the pain and sacrifice hadn't been wasted after all. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is showing them that they don't have to choose between loving their family and loving themselves. Both are possible, but only when everyone involved understands that real family is built on respect, not need. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, thank you for listening to my story and for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunction. I know many of you have experienced similar situations. Maybe you're the Sylvia in your family, or maybe you've recognized patterns in your own behavior that need changing. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to set difficult financial boundaries with family members? How did it work out? What would you have done differently? Your stories matter, and sharing them helps others who might be struggling with similar decisions right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your worth and building healthy relationships. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose themselves sometimes. We all need that reminder occasionally. Remember, your value as a person isn't determined by what you can give others, but by who you are when nobody needs anything from you. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your support. Until next time, choose yourself. You're worth it.